Good morning, Colorado. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It is Wednesday, May 25th at 9 a.m. and this is our weekly meeting. We have a pretty full agenda. We will start with the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue.
She's here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great. Thank you very much. Commissioners, we do have our agenda before us. First up was commissioner comments. I'd like to move that toward the end. I do think we have some things that we want to talk about, so folks pay attention. Next, we would have public comment. I would note for the record that we had 2 written comments, one from Janice Brown and a written comment from Joyce Lisbon. We had 2 folks sign up for public comment. Both are from 350 Colorado, Ms. Robertson and Ms. Christensen. Hearings Manager Larson, do you see either individual in our meeting with us?
Take a quick look. Apologies, I haven't checked yet.
While you do that, I would like to call upon Commissioner McGowan for a preliminary matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sure I'm not going to say this as eloquently as I would like to, but I would appreciate maybe just a couple moments of thought and reflection. We haven't met for a couple of weeks, so the tragedy in Buffalo has occurred, and then yesterday in Texas, and we know there's a lot of families that are dealing with some devastation and tragedy, and I can't imagine how they're trying to make it through the day. And we all continue to do our business because it needs to get done, but I know we're all thinking about them and wanting to send our support in any way that we can. So.
Let's all take a moment and pause. All right, thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Very important. All right, back to our business, which, as you know, we do need to undertake. Were we able to find either of our public commenters? You're muted, Ms. Larson.
Sorry. Mr. Chair, we have 350 Colorado in the meeting. I note Ms. Christensen and Ms. Robertson are both members of 350 Colorado. If they could raise their hand and just confirm that they're there, and we'll bring them in. Oh, here we are. We'll bring them in now.
Hi. I think Catissa was going to go first.
Okay, and Ms. Amaro, I don't think we need the 3-minute signal. These guys are sophisticated and have practiced before us before. We will not hold you to 3. We would like to hold you to whatever is reasonable. So, but we'll give each of you an opportunity to speak. So Ms. Robertson is going to go first.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my comments today. My name is Catissa Robertson. I'm from Aurora, Colorado. I'm a grad student at the University of Denver. I'm getting my master's in social work. I'm also a youth concerned about the climate crisis. I'm here today to read a letter sent to the Commission on May 12th on behalf of 30 organizations that represents the opinions of thousands of Coloradans that has not yet been responded to by the Commission. Dear Commissioners, the undersigned organization representing Tens of thousands of Coloradans respectfully request that you consider our input on the Cumulative Impacts Report, since the report is a living document that you can shape, as the director states, and as your Rule 904A requires. We are writing to make recommendations for the changes in the scope of the report. The letter focuses on air pollution, but our suggestions for how you evaluate cumulative impacts could easily be adapted to water, land, soil, wildlife, and other impacts as well. There's no definition of cumulative impacts in statute or in your rules. We propose you adopt the definition of the EPA and its publication, Consideration of Cumulative Impacts in the EPA Review of NEPA Documents. What are cumulative impacts? Cumulative impacts result when the effects of an action are added to or interact with other effects in a particular place and within a particular time. It is the combination of these effects and any resulting environmental degradation that can be the focus of cumulative impact analysis. While impacts can be differentiated by direct, indirect, and cumulative, the concept of cumulative impact takes into account all disturbances, since cumulative impacts result in the compounding of effects of all actions over time. Thus, the cumulative impacts of an action can be viewed as total effect on a resource, ecosystem, or human community of that action, and all other activities affecting that resource, no matter what entity is taking the action. We believe this definition is what the legislator intended in SB 19181. Consideration of the cumulative impacts of oil and gas development is only truly meaningful with regard to protecting public health, safety, and welfare if considered in addition to other activities affecting the ecosystem or human community. As the EPA states above, indeed, there are cumulative impacts indisputably arising from oil and gas development, such as VOC emissions and the formation of ground level ozone, that are also occurring from other sources over which the Commission has no jurisdiction. The Commission must consider whether the background rate of a particular impact is so high that a proposed oil and gas project or activity will cumulatively cause or contribute to an exceedance of a legal standard. I'm going to pass it to Kate to read the rest of the letter now. Thanks, Kate.
Yes, we divided up into two because it's kind of long. I'm Kate Christensen. Thanks for taking the time to hear my comments today. The letter continues. The Cumulative Impacts Report should include data that will allow you to evaluate the contribution of oil and gas pollution to the cumulative emissions of VOCs, particulates, and other hazardous pollutants in each zip code, the cumulative emissions of ozone precursors in each zip code within a non-attainment area, and the short and long-term effects of these cumulative pollutants. To determine these contributions and to have the ability to analyze the impacts in local areas, we request the following data be included in the reports. Emissions of pollutants described above for all major and minor point sources with permits to pollute, including oil and gas facilities, including zip code for each source. Per well and per site data on all pollution described above, including zip code information. Per well average daily emissions of ozone precursors from pre-production activities in ozone non-attainment areas. Transportation emissions in freight and commuting corridors. The number of wells in each zip code along with the well density map. This data should include all producing and non-producing wells that have not been plugged, including all out-of-service wells. Long-term records of pollution levels in each area, zip code or other applicable defined areas. It is well established that climate change is another cumulative impact contributed to by oil and gas development and combustion. Rule 904 and the 2022 Cumulative Impacts Report both show your intention to look at greenhouse gas emissions as a factor to analyze. We recommend the following data be added to the report to aid in your analysis of the role of the greenhouse gas emissions from oil and gas in climate change and associated costs. Total greenhouse gas emissions from all stages of oil and gas development in Colorado for the year should be reported, and the total social cost of carbon for these emissions should be contained in the report. Total production for oil and gas for the year, along with the accepted figure for the emissions caused by refining and burning products, and the social cost of carbon for emissions from this combustion. Total global production of oil and gas to determine Colorado's percentage of global production. Analysis of the data recommended in this letter will give us a realistic estimate of the cumulative impact of the oil and gas development in Colorado, both on local communities and on the global environment. It is relevant to look at Colorado's impact on the global phenomenon of climate change because global climate change in turn is having an impact on Colorado itself. The report states that literature, and this in quotes, literature related to cumulative impacts to public health, safety, welfare in the environment, and wildlife resources from oil and gas development are numerous. However, the report only cites new literature, even though your analysis will surely consider the entire body of literature as your basis for evaluation. Therefore, we urge the Commission to include, either in each report or on a page on your site, a summary of important existing literature that is used as a foundation for your evaluation of cumulative impact. Each year's report should contain a link to the most recent IPCC summary for policymakers, along with a synopsis. We appreciate and will be making use of the cumulative impacts page, where reports can be submitted for your review. Thank you for your consideration of our suggestions in shaping the cumulative impacts report. Please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions, and we appreciate this opportunity to collaborate and look forward to continuing work on this important issue. And this letter was signed by 350 Colorado, Be the Change, Broomfield CAN, Broomfield Concerned, Broomfield Health and Safety First, Catholic Network, Citizens Alliance for Sustainable Englewood, Colorado Coalition for Livable Climate, Colorado Jewish Climate Action, Colorado Rising, Colorado Small Business Alliance, Clean Energy Action, Cultivando, Empower Our Future, Estes Valley Clean Energy Action, Healthy Air and Water Colorado, Indivisible Colorado, Larimer Alliance for Health, Safety, and the Environment, Mental Health and Inclusion Ministries, Moms Clean Air Force Colorado Chapter, Nick Venner, Metro State student and our Children's Trust plaintiff, North Range Concerned Citizens, Resilient Denver, Sierra Club of Colorado, Smog Free Denver, the Lookout Alliance, Together Against Neighborhood Drilling, Together Colorado, Climate Justice Committee, Wild Earth Guardians, and Women from the Mountain. So I think, this is me not speaking for the groups, but editorializing here, it's impossible to consider the comprehensive area plans that are coming up, like the Bronco one, without adding these considerations to the cumulative impact analysis, because these giant plans are decades of emissions that won't be considered for cumulative impacts if they're approved right now. That seems woefully negligent and not in the spirit of SB 181 or NEPA definitions of cumulative impacts. So does anybody have any questions?
No, thank you both. I just had one clarification, and then Commissioner McGowan has a question. We received the letter twice, May 11th and then May 20th.
Right.
And May 20th, I think, is the appropriate document for us to be looking at. It had a clarification of some sort of who was signing and not. Is that accurate, Ms. Christensen?
That is accurate. Thank you. Yes. And the one
Okay.
we just read was the most accurate or most up-to-date version.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your comments. And I read the letter that you sent, so thank you for sending it. And for me, I'm not sure that I didn't respond individually to each of your points because we had just had a meeting about cumulative impacts and a check-in with commissioners. And the document is updated annually. And we did let all of our stakeholders know that as the year continues and as you think of things that should be added or you would like to see added or considered, to submit those things. So I had just assumed that that was part of your submittal for our consideration as we think about updating the report for next year. So I appreciate the input, and I think that many of those things are issues or policy considerations that were brought up by the commissioners when we did our kind of check-in with each other. And I know that there'll be like I think there'll be some robust conversation about many of those issues that you had in your letter.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Any further questions for the panel? All right, seeing none, thank you both for presenting and being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings the commission to consent agenda. Does any commissioner have questions with regard to consent? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we have now before us KPK docket 2011-00261, which is a motion for continuance. We have before us, let's go ahead and bring Mr. Jacobs and our AAG to the table, Ms. Stafford, in case we have questions. So this is set before us upon a motion filed by KPK to continue the June 15th and 16th hearing on the issue of whether KPK is in substantial compliance with the CPA. KPK articulated its reasons within the motion. AAG Stafford and staff responded and articulated their reasons as to why they believe the motion should not be granted. The hearing officer entered an order in which it indicated that this was before us without oral argument, but that the parties should be present if we have questions.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Just a second, Mr. Jacobs. Commissioners, that's how this is set before us. Are you comfortable proceeding that way? Obviously, one of the parties desires to speak to us. Do we want to allow that to happen and sort of get a sense of what is wanting to be told? Seeing no shaking of heads in the negative fashion, Mr. Jacobs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I request the opportunity to provide a couple minutes of brief reply verbally. I believe that the standard has been misapplied and not specifically met by counsel for staff. And that is what I would like to cover for you. And I think it's essential to your deliberations on the motion.
All right, we'll recognize you for a couple minutes. Go for it.
Thank you. Ms. Stafford cites to a couple of cases on page 1 of staff's response, the Todd v. Bear Valley and Cherry Creek School District cases, but she misstates the standard that we must establish we would not be afforded a fair hearing without the continuance, and that we need for that our need for a continuance outweighs staff's mandate to regulate oil and gas operations to protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. Well, that's the universal mandate. It's always the case. She has not alleged prejudice with any particularity. We're asking for a modest 30-day continuance in order to be afforded a fair opportunity to prepare for what could be a very, very consequential hearing for my client. And due process concerns under Colorado case law do vary with the severity of consequences that can result from a proceeding like this compliance determination proceeding. Due regard for the convenience and necessity of both parties was not afforded during the preliminary hearing, pre-hearing conference. The hearing officer made it very clear that this commission ordered a hearing in 45 days. He was merely ministerially, serially setting that hearing. There was no opportunity and he had no authority to grant a continuance then, even if we had more promptly raised our concerns. We became concerned as we dealt with the reality of an order requiring a 2-day hearing on June 15 and 16, and we promptly filed a motion to continue thereafter. We believe we've met the good cause requirement under Colorado law. The demonstration of prejudice is really absent, other than the environment will suffer if we continue this hearing for 30 days. That's not particularized prejudice. That assumes that something will happen after a hearing instantaneously that is better than KPK's attention to these sites at considerable expense and effort. That presumption is not reasonable, and staff has not made any showing of what would happen if they took over at these sites the day after a hearing in which the CPA might be canceled or terminated by this commission. So the prejudice has not been shown. And then lastly, she argues about the general expense to tribunal resources of a continuance, but that's also not particularized. I don't think that this commission's tribunal resources will necessarily be wasted in 30 days additional time. And then she even says, we've asked for more time because we don't know about the relief that staff might request. I still haven't gotten an answer from staff about the relief that they might request. And that we should now, instead of addressing that together with a hearing on compliance, that we should truncate that, and that should be a separate hearing on it. And how does that affect the tribunal's resources? It's inconsistent. So no showing of prejudice has been made. The arguments are internally inconsistent, and the standard has been misapplied. I think we're entitled to a modest continuance of 30 days on these facts and circumstances. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Commissioners, I'm not inclined to provide additional oral argument at this point. I think this is adequately before us to make determinations. I did want to ask Mr. Jacobs one factual question. In your pleadings, you indicate that general counsel will be not available up to 1 week prior to 6/15, but there is also a statement that he is on his honeymoon from May 25th to June 1. June 1 is 2 weeks ahead of the hearing. I'm trying to understand the discrepancy there.
That may be a typo. The week that he's out is starting today. He leaves this afternoon for a week. He'll be back next Wednesday. That is an important time under the current schedule for putting a pre-hearing statement together, reviewing exhibits and identifying and prepping witnesses. We'll have more prep time thereafter, but it's this coming week, Wednesday to Wednesday.
So it's not 1 week, it's 2 weeks. There is also a reference that some other pivotal employee is not available.
Mr. Satterley's been out all week, and he's an important member of our team. Ms. Pritchard, an associate who's standing in with our group for Mr. Satterley during his absence, is out next week. Mr. Mueller, a member of our team in the past, as you know, has a very busy calendar and is only able to help in small amounts of time. So we've been struggling to piece together our defense team to put on what is a very consequential compliance determination hearing for our client.
Okay, I've just pivoted, pointed questions, please.
Very good, thank you.
All right. So, commissioners, at this point, the CMO case management order has witnesses and exhibits due June 2nd. All right. The applicant or the KPK has asked for a hearing continuance of a month. I'm not inclined, at least as one commissioner, to grant a continuance for a month. I would be okay with granting a continuance for a week and moving the hearing to the 22nd and 23rd, and moving the CMO deadline to June 9th, which accommodates some of the absences of KPK's folks not being around. They would be back around. It gives them an additional week. I note for the record that the responsible party deadlines, that was another concern, have been continued. I also note for the record that staff has agreed that if a continuance of NOAV deadlines would be helpful, that they would agree to that. I would think both of those things ought to happen. This gives this commission the opportunity to hear this in a timely manner. It provides some relief to the applicant in terms of people being gone or not gone. I believe it is an appropriate usage of our time. And so I would throw that out for your consideration, not having any real idea of where other commissioners may be thinking. With that, I look to my fellow commissioners for further deliberation, thoughts, comments. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'm aligned with the comments that you just made, and affording some additional time. I would like to see us tackle this within the month of June. I think it's important to have the commissioners who are on this Zoom call right now a part of those deliberations. I also think I'm hoping that we're not making this more difficult than it needs to be. I went back and read our order, and there are 10 or 11-ish main bullet points about what was required in the compliance order and what needs to happen with milestones and deadlines, including monthly compliance reporting. So I'm hoping that KPK is pretty up to speed on where they're at and where their milestones are and how far along they are in compliance. I don't want you to build a cathedral. Just stick to what was required in the compliance order. How are we moving forward? And so I'm worried that we're turning this into something a little more difficult than it needs to be. I'm open to providing some more time. I think that's fair, but I want to see us do it here in the month of June.
That was precisely the rationale that you articulated so well that I did not articulate, but I do want to hear this in the month of June with the current makeup of the commission. I think that's highly important to all parties. Commissioner Messner, Commissioner Gonzalez. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, I appreciate your suggestion. I think that's a fine suggestion. Really, it's the compounding effect of all the things going on with this operator right now when it comes to the NOAVs that came out May 3rd, right before our May 4th hearing, when we set this deadline. There are two members of their council being out, which we've seen, Mr. Wasserman before us, Mr. Satterley before us, participating with Mr. Jacobs in these matters. I do think they're important parts of the defense that should be able to participate thoroughly. And so anything we can do about, coordinating or giving an appropriate amount of time for defense, not only on this matter, but on the NOAVs that are coming right behind that and the responsible party determinations right behind that as well, I would support.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think based on the arguments that were provided by KPK, I don't see any need to provide longer than a week. And so I would support that.
All right, then I believe that we have consensus from commission in terms of where we are at. We will grant a continuance for a week. We will have the hearing officer enter an order rescheduling the hearing for the 22nd and the 23rd. Mr. Jacobs, I also know that you had requested more than 4 hours. I'm not inclined to grant that. You've got 4 hours case in chief. You've got lots of time for a Q&A from commissioners that don't count to that 4 hours. You've seen how that works. I believe you will have an adequate time to be able to present your case. Stafford, I also would look to you to follow up on your pledge to be, quote, okay with the NOAV continuance or whatever that may be, so that everybody can focus on the issue of substantial compliance. Are you good with that?
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I think staff is okay with that. KPK has not made a request of staff to continue those deadlines or to extend those deadlines. So as I said, we are committed to working with KPK to ensure that they have the appropriate resources to deal with the various issues.
Okay, so with that, I would encourage the two of you to get together and work that issue out so that everybody can focus on the 22nd, 23rd hearing on the issue of substantial compliance. Is there anything further?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd be happy to get with Ms. Stafford on the NOAVs and moving to continue those responses to NOAVs that have been issued. I do respectfully object to being confined to 4 hours of affirmative testimony and cross-examination and oral argument in a 2-day hearing. And I just think it's inadequate. I would respectfully request 6 hours, and I'd ask you to reconsider.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like we've been in these situations before where folks think they need more time, and then after we work our way through as a commission, I think we've been pretty flexible about saying it looks like we need some more time. We didn't get to everything we needed to. So I think I would be supportive of keeping it at 4 hours and hoping that we can get through it. And if we can't, I think we've been really reasonable about saying we haven't covered everything. Let's provide some more time for folks.
I tend to agree. Is there any disagreement with that from my other fellow commissioners? All right, seeing none, I think we need a motion to deny or maybe it's a motion to partially grant the motion for continuance, with the motion indicating that it'll be granted for a week and the matter will be reset for a hearing on June 22nd and 23rd, and directing the hearing officer to adjust the case management order accordingly, including an adjustment for witnesses and exhibits to June 9th. I think if I got all that right, AAG Davenport, if I could just ask somebody to say so moved.
So moved.
Second.
Mr.
Is
Chair,
that what- AAG Davenport?
thank you. I think your motion also includes a denial of KPK's request for more presentation time at hearing.
Agree. Is that incorporated into the motion in the second?
I modify the motion to incorporate AAG Davenport's comments.
I will renew my second.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Parties are so directed. Hearing officer is so directed. We believe that we're in a good spot to allow KPK the opportunity to have this additional time. We wish Mr. Wattsman a wonderful honeymoon. We will now move on to the next matter on our agenda,
Thank you, Mr.
which
Chair.
is docket 211-000-207. It is an OGDP involving Confluence DJ LLC. It is the Bigfoot Oil and Gas Development Plan. We need to get the parties to the table. Why don't we take 5 minutes and give the parties a time to get ready to go, get their screen shared and all that. And let's return at 9:38. All right, welcome back, folks. Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, May 25th meeting. We are on to docket number 211-000-207, the Bigfoot Oil and Gas Development Plan for Confluence DJ LLC. I see we have the applicant's attorney with us, Ms. Wazelinski. Good morning. Are you ready to present?
We are. Thank you, Chair Robbins. I believe Mr. Maxey may be presenting first, but we're ready to go.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. Mr. Maxey wanted to take the opportunity just to provide a few brief comments, since this OGDP is within Weld County and has gone through the WOGLA process.
All right, very good. Hello there, Mr. Mackey. Do you want to introduce yourself for the rest of the stakeholders that may be listening in, and then we look forward to hearing from you on this OGDP.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Robbins, fellow commissioners and staff. Jason Maxey with the Weld County Oil and Gas Energy Department. Thank you for a few minutes to make some brief comments as we have started to do here recently, and just also be available for any questions that the commission may have in regards to the Weld County process. So I'm just going to go through a few bullet points that I have up here on my screen to highlight some of the important dates and facts that Weld County evaluated when looking at this application for a Confluence DJ Bigfoot location. Weld County has assigned this permit number 1041 WOGLA 20-0069. We submitted comments on the 2A that was under consideration on March 21st, 2022, so a couple months back. The application was submitted to Weld County prior to our pre-application process and also prior to the COGCC rulemaking that preceded the current rules, which took effect in January 2021. However, even so, through the Weld County process, we did have an in-depth alternate siting discussion, and the applicant ultimately included 5 alternates on their location. In their application, all of which were thoroughly reviewed and discussed by staff, as well as our hearing officer. The COGCC was sent a referral request and they did respond. COGCC staff did respond on September 21st of 2020. And the referral did not include any comments regarding alternate siting. We received no public comments through our process at Weld County. However, we did receive comments back from a referral agency, that being Platte Valley RE7, Go Broncos. They were received. And as the commission knows, Weld County sends referrals to school districts for all WOGLAs, regardless of if a school building, facility, or property is within the notification buffer or not. We do this for the exact reason of the comments that we received, which were comments relating to traffic or bus route items. Confluence did respond to those comments from the Platte Valley School District on September 11th, 2020, with their proposals of how they will work with the district regarding the traffic concerns that were outlined in that referral response that we received. Weld County is completely satisfied with these proposals from Confluence. And I also want to make mention that this is another example of how the Weld WOGLA process works and is effective with the stakeholders in the local area. We held a hearing on October 8th, 2020. The final order was recorded with the county clerk and recorder on October 20th, 2020, so a couple weeks later. And then the final notice was in the Greeley Tribune on October 23rd. So as our submitted comments from March state, and also as Director Murphy's recommendation reflects, Weld County supports approval of this permit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Maxey. Appreciate your taking time to attend and to provide the important perspective from the relevant local government that is Weld County on this application. Do commissioners have questions? You must have done a good job. No questions.
Thank you.
All right, now we will hear from the applicant.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Maxey. We appreciate your participation as well. Just give me one moment. We've got our screen up. So my name is Kelsey Waselinki with Jost Energy Law, and with Jamie Jost, we represent Confluence DJ LLC in the Bigfoot Oil and Gas Development Plan. This application seeks approval of a 966-acre Bigfoot OGDP for 16 new horizontal wells from one new Bigfoot 11 location to develop an established 640-acre drilling and spacing unit for Section 11, Township 4 North, Range 63 West. The OGDP also requests in order to establish 2 320-acre wellbore spacing units, one for a new horizontal well on the north side of Section 11, and one for a new horizontal well on the south side of Section 11. The OGDP includes 2 existing horizontal wells currently producing from the existing 70 Ranch 10 East location, and that's adjacent to the west of Section 11. The Bigfoot 11 location does not trigger any COGCC ALA criteria. However, Confluence did engage in a detailed siting analysis as part of the OGDP application, which the team will share with you today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Brittany Roth with Confluence to present this OGDP to you today. And following Ms. Roth's presentation, we have a team of subject matter experts from Confluence who are available to answer any questions you have. Ms. Roth?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time today. My name is Brittany Roth, and I'm Engineering Manager at Confluence DJ. I will be walking us through the Bigfoot OGDP presentation. Next slide, please. Confluence Resources is a private oil and gas exploration and production company that formed in September 2016 and is headquartered in Denver. Confluence entered the DJ Basin in March of 2017 and created an operating arm of the company called Confluence DJ. We operate oil and gas holdings in the greater Wattenberg area of the DJ Basin, and all of our surface locations are within the boundaries of Weld County. The company started with 4 producing horizontal wells and have grown that count to 44. From the start, Confluence's top priority has been developing our acreage position safely and responsibly while efficiently recovering oil and gas. Next slide, please. The Bigfoot OGDP timeline starts with Confluence receiving an approved 1041 WOGLA Weld County permit on October 20th, 2020. The OGDP application was filed with the COGCC on October 28th of 2021 and was deemed complete by the director on February 22nd, 2022. The 30-day public comment period ended on March 23rd with no comments. And the petition deadline was on April 25th and no petitions were filed, which brings us to our hearing date today. Next slide, please. This is an overview of what's included in the Bigfoot OGDP. It repeats a bit of what Ms. Wasolanki had gone over. We're asking to establish 2 320-acre wellbore spacing units. These are shown in the map, outlined in bright green, straddling the southern edge and the northern edge of Section 11. We're also asking for approval of a 966.6 acre Bigfoot OGDP, which includes 16 new horizontal wells from 1 new Bigfoot 11 location to develop the established DSU, which is shown in the map, bordered in bright blue. This covers all of Section 11 and the 2 wellbore spacing units. It also includes 2 existing horizontal wells that are producing from Confluence's 70 Ranch 10 East location, and it asks for approval of a 2A for a new Bigfoot 11 location. Next slide, please. So the proposed Bigfoot 11 location is shown in this map in a light tan color, and it's bordered with a dotted black line. It's in the west half of Section 11, Township 4 North, Range 63 West, within Weld County. It can also be described as located approximately 10 miles southeast of the town of Kersey, Colorado, on the northeast side of the intersection of Highway 34 and Weld County Road 69. This location would utilize an existing access road off of Weld County Road 69 and would only need to be extended 440 feet to reach the working pad surface. The Bigfoot 11 location is due east of an existing interim reclaimed confluence location called 70 Ranch 10 East. This is shown on the map in the small red border. We'll talk a little more about this in the next few slides. Next slide, please. While the Bigfoot 11 location does not trigger any alternative location analysis criteria, during COGCC staff's technical review of the Form 2A, questions were asked regarding the existing 70 Ranch 10 East location and whether it could be used for the Bigfoot development, or whether Confluence had reached out to Bonanza Creek for the possibility of co-locating this development on their Latham U14 location, which is proximal to all of this. And if not either of those, why is the Bigfoot 11 location preferable? We put together a supplemental site analysis to provide answers to those questions. Next slide, please. Let's start by discussing why the 70 Ranch 10 East location is not suitable for Bigfoot development. First, let's look at the map shown here. The proposed Bigfoot 11 location is outlined in turquoise, and the dotted turquoise circle shows a 1 mile buffer around the location. The small yellow outline due west shows the interim reclaimed 70 Ranch 10 East location. And again, the dotted yellow circle shows a 1 mile buffer around that location. You can see that both locations are approximately 1 mile from the South Platte River, which runs to the northeast. Confluence purchased Edge Energy in 2017, and we inherited an in-process 2A for 70 Ranch 10 East. This 2A provided for 12 wells spaced 15 feet apart and their associated production facilities. The 70 Ranch 1011-1 and 1011-2 appraisal wells were drilled and completed by Confluence from the 70 Ranch 10 East location in 2018. After analyzing results of the appraisal wells, we determined that 16 additional wells and their associated facilities would be needed to efficiently produce the reservoir underlying Section 11. This would require expansion of the 70 Ranch 10 East location beyond its permitted boundaries. Unfortunately, this expansion would create surface disturbance within the surface owner's future development plans surrounding this location. And so we needed to look for an alternative. The 70 Ranch 10 East location was interim reclaimed to less than 1 acre on May 8th of 2020. Next slide, please. Next, let's discuss why co-locating on Bonanza Creek's Latham U14 location is not suitable for Bigfoot development. On the map, you can see the Bigfoot 11 location still in turquoise. The 2 existing appraisal wells drilled from the 70 Ranch 10 East location are shown in light pink. And the 16 proposed new wellbores are shown in dark pink. Bonanza Creek's Latham U14 location is shown in cross-hatched orange near the southeast corner of Section 11. While it makes sense to exhaust all options to utilize existing surface disturbance for future development if possible, in this case, there are surface constraints on the Latham U14 location that would not allow for Bigfoot development. Latham U14 was permitted for and fully developed with 18 wells and their associated separators, which takes up all space on that location. The rest of the production equipment for these wells is located on the Latham 1113 location to the southeast, just southeast. There would not be a room to accommodate 16 Bigfoot wells or the associated facility. If Latham U14 could accommodate more wells, co-locating with another operator while possible carries with it some underlying hazards. It would expose each operator to the other company's designs, safety standards, operating practices, reporting requirements, and inspections, to name a few. Next slide, please. And so Confluence pursued a new location that could accommodate our planned Bigfoot development. This map shows the working pad surface boundary of the Bigfoot 11 location in red. The outermost dotted line represents 2,000 feet from the working pad surface. The full permitted disturbance of the Bigfoot 11 location is 17.67 acres, with an interim reclamation size of 7.35 acres, which is enough space to safely develop and operate these 16 wells and their associated facility. Next slide, please. There are some notable highlights about the Bigfoot 11 location. There are no building units within 1 mile of the working pad surface. There are no wetland concerns. Bald eagle roost high priority habitat is the only HPH nearby, and it's more than 3,000 feet from the working pad surface. Gas and oil takeaway is proximal. The electrical grid is proximal. And the haul route is fully paved until a very short access road. Next slide, please. So this timeline of operations represents earliest anticipated start dates, but would be subject to rig and frac crew availability. The Bigfoot OGDP is planned to be developed continuously and in one occupation. Per this schedule, location construction would begin in June of this year, and following continuous operations, production would begin in May of 2023. Next slide, please. This slide highlights site-specific construction and grading best management practices, or BMPs. The site of the Bigfoot 11 location is zoned as agricultural and is non-irrigated. The key points to take away from this slide are that stormwater BMPs will be put in place prior to pad and access grading. These include a stormwater detention pond size for a 100-year storm event per Weld County requirements, diversion channels around the perimeter of location, and a vehicle tracking pad at the entrance. The existing grade here ranges from minus to plus 10%, and it will be graded to about a 0.5% slope. The topsoil will be stockpiled in the southeast corner of location, and once the location is graded, contoured, and compacted, it will be plated with 4 to 6 inches of road base, which will mitigate dust and protect the soil beneath. Next slide, please. Next are site-specific BMPs we will utilize during the drilling phase of development. The first thing to note here is that during staff's technical review of this location, this was deemed a sensitive area for water resources. Staff also concluded that successful implementation of confluence BMPs will minimize risk of contamination to groundwater here. Pointing this out to everyone because from this slide and forward, any bolded text represents a BMP that is protective of sensitive water resources. So running through the BMPs, Confluence will continuously monitor air quality using 4 sensors surrounding the Bigfoot 11 location from 10 days prior to spud through the first 6 months of production per CDPHE rules. So the next 2 BMPs come from our 1041 WOGLA process. The first is that a 32-foot engineered sound wall will be placed on the south and southwest edges of location during the drilling and completion phases of development to shield vehicles traveling on Highway 34, which is just south of this location, from the 24-hour operation. And then, as Mr. Maxey mentioned, we did hear from the Platte Valley School District, and we proposed a BMP where we would install a gate guard that would prevent traffic from exiting the location between the times of 6:05 and 6:25 in the morning and 3:45 and 4:05 in the afternoon. Of course, this is if school's in session. So this will be during both the drilling and completion phases. Secondary containment will be placed under any pipe connections or equipment that contain or carry fluids other than fresh water. We plan to leverage on-site power generation fueled by natural gas rather than diesel for our auxiliary equipment during the drilling phase. We will evaluate the use of a dual fuel rig during the rig procurement process, and we would prefer to use a rig powered by natural gas, provided that one is available. And lastly, all fluids involved in the drilling process will be contained in above ground tanks. There are no pits involved in this development. Next slide, please. Next are site-specific BMPs we will utilize during the completion and flowback phase of development. Many of the BMPs used for drilling carry over to completion and flowback, but the additional BMPs to note on this slide are that completion water will be transferred via lay flat line, so there will be no trucking involved in getting water to location. And once the water's on location, it will be stored in working tanks. So there will be no high volume harpoon or minion tanks set on location. We plan to utilize Tier 4 or better engines when we frac, which will result in lower emissions than the Tier 2 engines that are historically used in a frac operation. And lastly, our flowback setup here is equipped with current standards. All flowback tanks will be closed, and tank vapors will be routed to an ECD for destruction. Next slide, please. Next are site-specific BMPs we will utilize during the production phase of development. Gas and oil will produce to pipeline from this location, and water will be trucked due to no water gathering infrastructure in the area. Gas and oil gathering will be ready to accept production on day 1. Permanent power will be installed here, so the facility will run off of electricity rather than fuel. We'll use instrument air to power pneumatic controllers rather than natural gas. Tanks and separators will be within secondary containment. This location will utilize SCADA to read the operating conditions across the entire facility every 1 minute. And it will have the capability to emergency shut down wells if conditions exceed our set points. Daily audio, visual, and olfactory inspections will be conducted by Confluence lease operators. Additionally, facility piping here will all be on above ground racks, so it will be easier to identify any issues. And lastly, Confluence lease operators will have spill prevention, control, and countermeasure training annually, and we will conduct SPCC inspections every month. Finally, in response to a commissioner question, the Bigfoot OGDP doesn't contemplate a tankless system here for a few reasons. The first reason is there is no water gathering infrastructure in the area, so tanks would need to be set in any case to hold the water, the produced water. Secondly, oil gathering via pipeline requires the oil to be processed to a certain specification before it can enter the pipeline. At the Bigfoot 11 location particularly, the oil cannot contain more than 0.5% of water by volume. Having tanks gives the oil time to allow any remaining entrained water that wasn't removed in prior steps in the facility to separate out in the tank. So having some tanks allows consistent use of the pipeline because the quality of the oil that we're sending to the pipeline is more consistent and to spec. And then lastly, having some tanks also reduces vulnerability to operational upsets tied to the pipeline. If the pipeline shuts down for any reason, the tanks will allow the wells to produce while troubleshooting pipeline issues. Okay, next slide, please. This slide highlights site-specific interim reclamation BMPs. The key points here are that interim reclamation will be performed within 6 months of flowback release, and we will reclaim 10.32 acres, leaving 7.35 acres for the production phase of the operation. Next slide, please. The Bigfoot 11 location reduces cumulative impacts in numerous ways that have already been highlighted in prior slides, but are summarized here once more. In response to a commissioner question that was posed on whether or not any old vertical wells would be plugged in service of this OGDP, I would say that for every wellbore that Confluence plans to drill, we evaluate all existing or plugged and abandoned wells within 1,500 feet of the proposed wellbore's path to determine if A, either the well needs to be repaired, plugged and abandoned, or re-entered, or B, if no work needs to be done prior to the new development. The Bigfoot OGDP and its 16 wells represent a very unusual case in the DJ Basin. There were 0 vertical wells ever permitted or drilled within Section 11. Additionally, there are only 2 already plugged and abandoned vertical wells within 1/2 mile beyond the boundary of Section 11. So basically, there are no opportunities to plug old vertical wells because there are no old vertical wells here. Very unusual. Next slide, please. In summary, Confluence respectfully requests the approval of the Bigfoot OGDP and the Bigfoot 11 Form 2A for the development of 16 new horizontal wells. We also respectfully request approval of both wellbore spacing units for the development of these lands. The COGCC director recommends approval of this application. It is protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and does not trigger any ALA criteria. It's protective of sensitive water resources and is also supported by Weld County with 1041 WOGLA permit approval. Confluence is committed to the BMPs we discussed today to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. This concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for your time today. At this time, I'd like to invite the other Confluence panelists to join me as we open for questions.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Do you have anything further, Ms. Waslinki, before we move to commissioner questions?
Nothing further from me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the thorough presentation, appreciate the points regarding the ALA and why the co-location on the existing Bonanza Creek was not viable. I at least appreciate having some additional information on that. Appreciated hearing from Mr. Maxey in Weld County. We have all of this before us. We have the director's recommendation of approval. I now turn to my fellow commissioners for any questions to the panel. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. I'm wondering if I can ask a few more questions about the condensate tanks and the number that are needed and the purpose. So when I originally read the OGDP, and this could be on my part, so I apologize, I thought that they were there kind of in case there was an upset situation and you needed storage and time to shut down the facility. But now it sounds like what I hear you saying is the condensate tanks are need for further separation before they go into the delivery system. Am I understanding correctly?
You are. They actually it's both. It's both for separation. That's part of it, but it's also in case there are any upsets on the pipeline system. It's kind of double. There.
Okay, so I don't know if we need to clarify that in your application or not, or maybe I just missed that point. So I just want to put that out there. I guess my other, not a concern, but I want to be clear. The tanks are not meant as a delivery system. So if there's an upset situation, I get that you would need to use those in an emergency, but that they would not be used for continual delivery of product, because I think that's an emissions issue. Something that we're trying to get away from, which is truck delivery versus using a pipeline. And so I just want to be clear that that's the intent here also.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. What I would also add is the amount of tanks that Confluence looks to set is it's really just 1 day's worth of storage. We design it for that. If we were to have pipeline takeaway issues that seemed to be would require some time to work through, then at that point, we would need to shut in the wells, and that would be our course of action.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate you providing additional for me. Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think it gives me a good picture of that plus the application gives me a good picture of the proposed operations, and I appreciate that. In the presentation as well as in the application, there were some things around drilling, around completion that kind of utilize the words where possible, will evaluate, will likely, plan to use. I mean, so not shalls or wills. And so, I mean, I understand that, and just understand when I evaluate an application, if there's those, if that language is being utilized, then I have to assume that they won't be utilized just in my evaluation. That doesn't necessarily change, what I think about this particular application, but I think it's just important to understand that as I'm reviewing an application. But I think my question is when you're doing the cumulative impacts report, the analysis, and you're evaluating these particular areas where you're considering the use of stuff, whether that's tier 4 frac fleet or whether that's dual fuel rigs or so on and so forth, are you considering that you are utilizing those, or are you considering that you are not utilizing those as you're doing the evaluation?
That's a great question. And I actually, as a Confluence panelist, we have our drilling and completions manager, Justin Gale, on with us as well. Commissioner, per your question, I would say for the BMPs that we talked about, there's only a few on there where we truly plan to try to do something, but are not promising to do so. In this application's instance, one of the key items, and really the only one, is the use of a dual fuel drilling rig. For the other items, we will leverage on-site power generation via natural gas rather than diesel for our auxiliary equipment. We will use tier 4 engines or better in our frac operation, but the drilling rig procurement is the only BMP where we're just uncertain. And Justin, would you add anything to that?
No, thank you, Brittany. I think you captured it there. Certainly for our auxiliary equipment, that is the plan, is to use a generator to power light plants and auxiliary equipment, and that's what we did on the last operation that we finished here in the spring, was to use on-site generation in order to power some auxiliary equipment. And I think the question then is how much more can we add to that? Not whether or not we will use it or not, but just, are we going to be able to have other equipment out there that we can add to that on-site power generation? And from the use of a dual fuel drilling rig, that is the preference. And when we're evaluating rig availability and rig contracts, it is our preference to use a rig that has natural gas power generation there, but just uncertain on what is available.
And thank you for the answer to those. I do understand the availability piece, and like I said, I mean, I'm not saying it's inappropriate to utilize that. You're going to do the best that you can. I think the question though is, when you're doing that cumulative impacts analysis, are you doing it assuming that you're utilizing these things that maybe you can utilize or not? And I appreciate the clarification, Ms. Roth, about the tier 4 frac fleet and the on-site natural gas generators and so on and so forth. So that's helpful for me in evaluating as well. But I was just curious about how that tied into your cumulative impacts analysis and the different emissions associated with that.
Yeah. And Commissioner, just circling back once more, what we assume in that is that we are using all of those BMPs listed for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Commissioner, did you get clarification of your question about which rig was assumed would be used in your cumulative impacts?
Are you asking me a question?
I'm asking if that was, I'm not sure I understood the answer exactly. So,
well,
when you gave us the
if I'm
info,
wrong, I think what I heard was that it was assumed that the dual fuel rig was going to be utilized in the cumulative impacts analysis. Is that correct?
That is correct. Sorry about that.
Okay, sorry. I think I didn't understand. Okay, thank you.
I stumbled over myself a little bit there. Thank you.
I think that's it. I think just a comment. Again, I appreciate the presentation. I thought that was a very thorough presentation, and I appreciate that. That's helpful for me. I think we've had some comments, not on this application, but generally about review times, and I will note on that this did go back at least once to draft, but upon completeness determination, COGCC staff was able to review this around 90 days. And it's in front of us around 90 days, which I think is an appropriate and realistic timeframe for OGDP reviews. And so I appreciate that. And I don't have any further questions or concerns about this particular application. And so I'm happy to make a motion to approve this particular OGDP as presented.
Is that indeed a motion, Commissioner Messner?
I think I formulated that in the motion. So yes, it's a motion.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there further questions and or further deliberations before we vote on the motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the OGDP signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The OGDP is approved. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for working with our staff through the development of the OGDP, and you're excused.
Thank you very much for your time today, commissioners.
Thank you very much.
All right, with that, I'm going to continue onward for commissioners. We're a little ahead of schedule and we only have a couple of other matters before us. Next is docket 2110-00200. This is a mallard exploration OGDP, the Shelduck OGDP. And Ms. Waslinki is the applicant's attorney. So we will allow her to bring to the table her panel. I believe we are also going to once again hear from Jason Maxey, Director of the Oil and Gas Department at Weld County. Mr. Maxey, you're up.
Thank you very much, Chair Robbins and Commission. And for a couple minutes here, just again to talk about the docket item that's in front of you for mallard exploration Shelduck, which has been permitted under 1041 WOGLA 20-0059. My comments will remain high level as they did for the last docket item. Weld County submitted comments on the 2A on March 9th, 2022. And again, similar to the prior docket item, a couple of these next bullet points are very similar. The application was submitted to Weld prior to the pre-application process that we are now very used to working with COGCC staff, but it was prior to that. And prior to the COGCC rulemaking that took effect January 2021 with the new rules and prior to our new MOU that was signed in April of last year. However, even though that was prior to some of those new rules and prior to the pre-application process, but we did have in-depth alternate siting discussions with the applicant for this location as well. And they included that information in their submittal to Weld County. And within that information and within that consideration, Mallard did propose eliminating one surface location, which was closer to building units, which I believe was referred to as the Shelduck North at the time. And the applicant will probably mention that during their presentation. But we took that as also a positive for cumulative impacts and siting analysis. No public comments were received during the Weld County process. No referral comments indicated any conflicts or disagreement with the proposed location. We held our hearing on August 27th of 2020, and the final order was recorded with the clerk and recorder on September 17th of 2020. And a few days later, on September 23rd, the final order was noticed in the Greeley Tribune. So to sum up, final comment similar to the last one as well, as our submitted comments state, and also concurring with Director Murphy's recommendation, we would support approval of the permit at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxey. Are there any questions for Mr. Maxey from the commission? All right, seeing none, Mr. Maxey, thanks again. We do appreciate your providing the perspective of Weld County, the relevant local government for this. It's an important consideration for the commission, and we appreciate taking time. All right, I think we'll hear from the applicant now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Robbins. I am going to share my screen. If you could just give me one moment. Let me see here. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'll go into presentation mode here momentarily after I give a brief introduction. So again, my name is Kelsey Wazelinki. I'm with Jost Energy Law, and with Jamie Jost, we represent Mallard Exploration LLC in the Shelduck South Oil and Gas Development Plan. So this application seeks approval of an approximate 1280-acre Shelduck South Oil and Gas Development Plan for the development of 8 new horizontal wells from one new Shelduck South location to develop the established 1280-acre drilling and spacing unit for sections 5 and 6, township 7 north, range 60 west. There is one horizontal well currently producing in section 5 of the established unit, which will continue to produce and allocate proceeds pursuant to an established 640-acre unit for that well. The location is over 3,000 feet from the nearest residential building unit and only triggers one ALA criteria, which is the 1202D high priority habitat for the pronghorn winter concentration area. As the Mallard team will present to you today, Mallard consulted with CPW as part of this OGDP, and through that consultation, CPW waived alternative location analysis for the Shelduck South location. However, Mallard did complete an informal ALA with CPW, which Mallard will describe in detail to you today. In addition, Mallard and CPW have agreed to compensatory mitigation and Form 2A language, which we will also describe to you in today's presentation. And with that brief introduction, I will hand it over to Aaron Matthews with Mallard to present the Shelduck South OGDP. And I'm going to start my presentation here.
All right, thanks, Kelsey. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Again, my name is Aaron Matthews, and I'm the Vice President of Development at Mallard Exploration. I know we've presented to the Commission a few times now, but as a quick reminder, Mallard was founded in 2017, and all of our operations are located in rural northeast Weld County, focused mainly in areas between Briggsdale, Keota, and New Raymer. Here's a brief timeline of our project to date. The local land use permit, which was a 1041 Weld County WOGLA, as Mr. Maxey just explained, was approved in September of 2020. In October of 2021, Mallard submitted this OGDP application. The application was deemed complete in February of 2022. and the 30-day public comment period closed on March 18th, 2022, with no comments being received. The petition deadline ended April 25th, 2022, with no petitions filed. And this brings us to today's hearing. The Shellduck South Pad is located in Lot 6 of Section 6, Township 7 North, Range 60 West, in unincorporated Weld County. Generally, the pad is south of County Road 86 and west of County Road 97, which is approximately 12 miles east of Brigsdale, Colorado. The closest residential building unit is 3,389 feet to the northwest. And on this map, you can see the yellow circle represents a 1 mile buffer. The Shellduck South Pad is over 1 mile from any municipal boundary, high occupancy building unit, designated outside activity area, school, child care center, or DI community. The Shellduck South Pad is an approved location that expired on June 28th of 2021. Originally, the DSU was to be developed from 2 locations, and this is the what Mr. Maxey also hinted on. There was originally the Shellduck South Pad and the Shellduck North Pad. Those 2 locations included 16 wells, 48 tanks, and a combined disturbance area during construction of 25 acres. Through this OGDP application and through the Weld County process, we reduced the location down to the Shellduck South Pad, which now proposes 8 wells, 5 oil tanks, 5 water tanks, a disturbed area during construction that includes the access road of 13.6 acres, and a size of location after interim reclamation of 5.6 acres. So compared to the original DSU development plan, this application is reducing ground disturbance during construction by 11.4 acres and reducing location size and interim reclamation by 9.2 acres, and greatly reduces the number of tanks that will be on location. As Kelsey mentioned in her introduction, the Shellduck South Pad will develop an approved 1,280 acre DSU, which is shown in yellow. The surface location will develop the entire DSU through a combination of 8 wells going to the east. Those wells are represented in the light blue color. And then as shown on this exhibit in pink, you'll see the existing horizontal well, the Leggett 15H, that Kelsey mentioned, that is currently producing and is operated by Red Hawk Petroleum. The Shellduck South location only triggered one of the alternative location analysis criteria. The location and the access road are located entirely within the 1202D high priority habitat for the pronghorn winter concentration area. On the map provided, you can see the Shellduck South Pad location in relation to the mapped pronghorn winter concentration area shown in the peach color. Prior to submitting this application, Mallard consulted with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. CPW recommended that the COGCC grant the ALA waiver for this Shellduck South location, especially since Mallard indirectly completed an informal ALA with CPW. And so through our consultation with CPW, staff asked us to provide the siting analysis that we used to determine the Shellduck South Pad. By doing this, it really led to what we were calling an informal alternative location analysis with CPW staff. So this slide shows all of the surface locations that were considered in planning the development of this DSU. On this map, the orange cross hatching represents the high priority habitat boundary. The light blue dashed circles are 2,000 foot setbacks from residential building units. The yellow highlighted parcels are federally owned lands that make up the Pawnee National Grasslands. And the blue water body shapes are mapped wetlands from the National Wetlands Inventory. So you can see alternate location number 1, that was what was originally permitted as the Shellduck North Pad. It is located within the high priority habitat and it's within 2,000 feet of residential building unit. Alternate location number 2 is also still within high priority habitat, and it results in much less efficient mineral development due to the positioning of the existing horizontal well in the south half of section 5, which is shown on this exhibit in a red color. Alternate location number 3 is also still within the high priority habitat and is within close proximity to the mapped wetlands, and again leads to the less efficient mineral development due to that existing horizontal well. Then we looked at alternate location number 4, which would be a location outside of the high priority habitat, but that surface is federally owned and is part of the Pawnee National Grasslands. And it's also within proximity to a mapped 1202C no service occupancy habitat for a hawk nest. And then finally, we also looked at location number 5, which would get us outside of the high priority habitat and outside of Pawnee National Grasslands. However, being that it's so far removed from the DSU boundaries, it's not technically feasible to actually develop the Shelduck DSU from the surface location due to the length of well step outs that would be required. Which therefore, all these locations we looked at brought us to our preferred location, the Shelduck South Pad. The Shelduck South Pad maximizes the distance from the nearest residential building unit, maximizes the ability to efficiently drill the DSU by planting the wellbores around the existing horizontal well. Drilling and completion operations are technically feasible. It maximizes the distance from the mapped wetlands. And additionally, the surface owner is also in favor of the siting of this location and has executed a surface agreement with Mallard. And on this slide, this is just a summary of everything that I just read through, but I wanted to keep the map up so it'd be easier for everyone to follow. So as stated, this location is within the high priority habitat, and per the wildlife mitigation plan, Mallard has agreed to compensatory mitigation efforts to mitigate direct and indirect unavoidable adverse impacts to the habitat. The mitigation fee for direct impacts is $47,388. And then the mitigation fee for the indirect impacts will be dependent on the timing of operations. If all development occurs outside of the pronghorn winter season, the indirect mitigation fee will be $28,837. If development must occur during any portion of the pronghorn winter season, the indirect mitigation fee will be increased to $154,108. Mallard intends to conduct pad construction, drilling, and completion operations outside of the pronghorn winter concentration season. However, if Mallard is unable to complete all operations outside of the winter season, Mallard will provide notice as soon as practical, indicating that operations will be occurring within the pronghorn winter concentration season via Form 4 sundry and through direct communication with CPW. This commitment is documented as a BMP. The actual language is shown here in the bullet point on this slide, but that BMP is documented on the Form 2A and within the wildlife mitigation plan itself. And also note that we have worked with CPW where all mitigation will be completed by CPW on behalf of Mallard. So as part of our site-specific wildlife mitigation plan that was approved by CPW, we agreed to various BMPs that will be implemented at this location to best protect the pronghorn habitat. The BMPs include use of pipeline for oil, produced water, and gas takeaway to limit vehicle-wildlife interactions, limiting use of fencing or other barriers, but when needed for safety, using wildlife-friendly fencing designs, use CPW recommended pronghorn seed mix for interim and final reclamation, use Tier 4 quiet fleet completion crews, and electricity will be brought to the location to power the facility, minimizing long-term noise from the production equipment. And we will use warm color lighting. At this time, Mallard anticipates starting development at the Shelduck South pad in May of 2023. 8 months of continuous operations consisting of drilling, completion, and flowback would result in the wells being online in December of 2023, prior to the start of the winter pronghorn season. We Please do note that this proposed timeline is always dependent on external factors such as rig and frac crew availability, equipment supply chain, and third-party pipeline connects. And so getting into the summary of our operations will begin with pad construction. This location will require nominal cuts and fills to grade the pad and to construct stormwater drainage features. Per Will County 1041 WOGL regulations, this location will be constructed with a designated detention pond that is sized for the 100-year storm event, and this pond will remain through the life of the project. The location will be plated with aggregate road-based material, and all stockpiles and cut and fill slopes will be stabilized with pronghorn seed mix upon completion of construction. And I will now turn the presentation over to Matt to continue discussing operations.
Thank you, Aaron. The next few slides generally cover our technologies and mitigation measures that we implement across the drilling, completion, flowback, and production phases. Commissioners, you've heard these in our past couple of OGDP applications, but I will go through them in detail again, and happy to answer any questions or details at the end. So all locations are covered with temporary impermeable synthetic liners underneath rig equipment and in a fluid storage areas. We utilize a smaller footprint surface rig that uses fresh water to drill and set surface casing. Therefore, no oil-based mud is used across the aquifers. We always attempt and have successfully been able to source our big rig that has diesel and natural gas dual fuel capability, but I'll echo the comments on the earlier application that smaller operators that don't have continuous year-round rigs, there is some limited ability to guarantee that in the future date. We will use closed loop mud systems and group 2 based oil muds. Cuttings are not stockpiled and they're continuously hauled to a disposal facility. Our rig lighting is focused downward and concentrated towards the floor, and our air permits are in place before operations begin, which consist of a general air permit and as well also creates an active monitoring plan that begins before the big rig. And I'll just provide some more detail based on questions in the prior application that the general permit does assume a diesel rig, so it kind of assumes the worst case emission scenario, and then any utilization of natural gas before that is an improvement, obviously. Next slide, please. On the completion and flowback side, those synthetic liners are once again utilized and expanded. We use containerized sandbox to haul, transport, and handle proppant. All of our water is transported via temporary lay flat line. We do have closed loop flowback systems with ECD redundancy, and all of our facilities are completed prior to flowback. And we will use tier 4 quiet fleets, and this is a significant reduce in NOx, particulate matter, and CO2 and noise reduction. And I definitely encourage you to visit Liberty's website to kind of understand a bit more about the noise reduction. Next slide, please. On the production infrastructure, secondary containment is installed around all equipment. We use pneumatic controllers versus historical use of natural gas. Electricity is brought to power the entire location, so there's no on-site generation through natural gas or any other technologies that have emissions. Flow lines are installed above ground, allowing daily inspections. AOV inspections occur daily by Mallard personnel and then on a monthly basis by third parties. All locations are monitored remotely, and SCADA is utilized, and we used warm colored lighting to minimize light pollution and protect wildlife. And then as Aaron already mentioned, we do have partnerships in place. So oil, gas, and produced water are all on pipeline in the flowback period and day 1 of production. Next slide, please. So to summarize our cumulative impacts evaluation, we do have limited receptors in this area. We're over 3,000 feet from the nearest residential unit and over 1 mile from any high occupancy building unit, childcare facility, school, or DI community. We're over 2,000 feet from the nearest public road. And as you heard, we have overall reduced our footprint from 2 locations to 1, and overall ground disturbance by 9.2 acres. And whenever possible, we utilize local and regional contractors, vendors, service companies, just to limit overall impacts. Next slide, please. So to summarize, the Shelduck South OGDP is recommended for approval by the director. We believe it's protective of public health, safety, welfare of the environment, and wildlife resources. It's a result of significant consultation with CPW. It's supported by Weld County, as you previously heard. And Mallard is committed to best management practices to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, and would be happy to open up for questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Volkmar. I'll start with questions. So this was originally approved for 16 wells. Is that accurate?
16 wells across 2 pads. That's accurate.
And now you're looking at 8 wells from 1 pad. Is the current request, is that targeting the same minerals? In other words, were you going to obtain the minerals from 2 pads with 16 wells, and now it's 1 pad with 8 wells?
Correct.
And that's a result of better practices, development in operations, or what?
A combination of quite a few factors. When we began drilling in this area in 2018, there were limited wells that were kind of an earlier vintage of technology. So there was kind of an uncertainty around what was the optimal spacing and development plans. And so over the course of the last several years, us and other operators in the area have drilled wells at different spacing and different benches of the Niobrara. And ultimately, we believe that 8 wells across a 1280 DSU is kind of the optimum development spacing for maximizing recovery of the resource.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to note for the record that in looking at the wildlife components to this, the high priority habitat for the pronghorn, it looks to me like it's fairly extensive. Is that, and covering hundreds of square miles? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate in this area and broadly in the state. If you review the commission map, it's very extensive as I understand it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the information around the look into alternative location analysis to try to address some of those concerns. My fellow commissioners, questions for the panel? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question, but a comment. I'm appreciative of the updated schedule for the rig because it looks like your original application had you kind of doing operations that overlapped with the winter range timing, I think, and that looks like your updated schedule is making a more concerted effort to stay outside of it. So I appreciate that.
Other comments or questions from commissioners? Well, panel, you did a good job. We don't have a ton of questions or comments. In fact, I think we just had several comments. Commissioners, no further questions or comments. Do we have a motion?
I'll move approval of the OGDP.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have further comment?
I do have one comment, Mr. Chair. Like the previous one, I will note, as there has been some discussion around timing of review of applications, that once this was actually determined complete, that it is in front of us around 90 days, which I think both is responsive and appropriate and reasonable as far as the timeline to review an OGDP. So thank you to the applicant and staff for that.
Good note and comment. Any further deliberations or comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of granting the motion to approve the OGDP, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. The OGDP is approved. Thank you very much to the panel.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, commissioners, at this time, I believe the only thing left on our agenda is commissioner comments. I had taken the discretion of the chair to move that toward the end of the meeting. I do have a comment or comments that I would like to make, and I'm happy to recognize other commissioners at the, once we get through what I'm wanting to talk about. So what I wanted to talk about is the guidance that the commission provided to itself or to the director or to our stakeholders about 6-8 months ago on 604B4 director's recommendations. And I think I actually sort of started that discussion, and the idea at that time was ultimately the 604B4 determination is a subjective determination of the commission. And I supposed at the time that maybe it made sense for the director recommendation not to be a firm approve, not approve, approve with conditions, but instead that the director recommendation could be more lenient, such as whether something is approvable or not approvable, et cetera. Since that time, I have heard from multiple stakeholders, you may have as well, that they really would like us to move back to a more formal director's recommendation. And as a result of that, I've gone back and looked at our rules in the SBP. I've had some discussions with our AAGs, and I would like to suggest that we indeed do that, that we provide guidance back to stakeholders, our operators, and to the director that indeed, when it's a 604B4 matter, that we receive a firm recommendation. Is one, the 100 series definition of director's recommendation says, quote, the director's written recommendation to the commission about whether to approve or deny an OGDP or a cap. 2, rules 306B provides criteria under recommend approval of an OGDP. And I believe that that contemplates that there is ultimately a recommendation. And then rule
Chairman
6.
Roberts, you cut in and out there a little bit, and I think I missed that last point.
Okay, yeah, it said my internet was unstable. I may have children waking up and using the internet as well. I apologize. My second point was that rule 306B contemplates a actual recommendation. It says that it provides the criteria under which the director may recommend approval, the addition of conditions of approval, or denial. And I believe that seems to contemplate that there is an actual recommendation. And then thirdly, 604B4 itself establishes, as you all are aware, a list of criteria upon which the commission will base its substantial equivalence finding. And the first of these criteria is indeed the director's recommendation. So in line of process improvement, in line of committing to trying to continue to do things as best we can, I take the feedback that we've received from our stakeholders. I also take the fact that I kind of miss a director's recommendation for consideration by the commission. And so while it may have been my idea to sort of think about not having a firm recommendation, I want to pivot, reverse course, and potentially allow the director to provide an actual recommendation. The final piece to that is, I do significantly rely upon the significant expertise of our 140-person staff as they look at these OGDPs. They spend an inordinate amount of time looking at OGDPs, looking at the alternative locations, looking at all the things that our rules contemplate. And so I do appreciate the fact of having a formal recommendation from the director. And so I'd like to suggest that we revert back to where we started and try that on for size once again for 604 B4 determinations before this commission. I do know that I've got our AGs available if we wanted to ask them about that. I don't know that that's critical. And I don't know what the rest of my fellow commissioners are thinking, but that's what I wanted to throw out in commissioner comments. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate your point. I appreciate your thoughts. I think that, I think the director's recommendation is important. I think the evaluation of the 140 person staff and the expertise associated with that is incredibly important in any decision-making around OGDP applications. I can be fine with going back to the way that we did it originally and having a formal director's recommendation for every single OGDP. I will note that it's not unheard of in local government land use processes to have truncated director's recommendation that include approval of certain parts of it and certain parts of it being left to the discretion of either a planning commission or an elected body. And so I didn't think that the process that we were utilizing was particularly inappropriate based on the experiences that I've had in the past reviewing land use applications. However, I don't think having a formal director's recommendation for every OGDP is inappropriate either. I think it's however we want to handle it and whatever we think is the best process forward. So I can be okay with reverting back to what we were doing and seeing how that works for a while.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with the comments from both commissioners thus far. I also think that a director's recommendation gives us a springboard, a place to start, and it means that they've looked at things for, taking that first brush and giving us food for thought. And I'm always appreciative of the input that staff gives us. And I think that when I went back and looked at our rules, I think it does say that it's pretty clear that we're looking for a director's recommendation first, and then we work off of that. But I think we were also very clear during mission change that if the 604B route is contemplated, that there's going to be a lot of consideration, deliberation by commissioners. So I think that changing back to director's recommendation shouldn't change that, and would still involve us being very deliberate and looking very carefully at that path and substantial equivalency.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm comfortable with this idea, and I specifically want to echo Commissioner McGowan's comments. The staff recommendation is really important, and we do rely on their expertise. There's a lot of subjective, maybe not interpretation, but application of that rule under our guise as commissioners, and I think it's important that we continue to endeavor to dig deep into those situations and to make sure that we're the ultimate deciders in that regard.
Great. Thank you all for your considered thoughts on the point. I agree with kind of everything that was said. AG Davenport, if you're with us, would want potentially to ask you, I think I know what we need to do in terms of just providing guidance back to the director and our operators and our stakeholders that, henceforth we'll look for a director's recommendation on all OGDPs. Is that enough? I think that's about as much as we did the last time when we had reverse course a bit.
Yes, I think that's sufficient, Chair. My recollection is the last time the commission provided what is somewhat more informal guidance in the regard it wasn't a formal motion or vote, and so this time around it's fair and reasonable to follow the same process and provide the commission's expectation that the director will provide a recommendation of approval or denial going forward.
or conditional approval.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. All right. So guidance is hereby provided. And thank you, commissioners, for speaking on that front with us. And thank you to our operators and our stakeholders and our staff for allowing commissioners to be flexible and to try to be creative and try to at all times undertake process improvement so that we are at the cutting edge of the regulations that we've adopted as we apply them to potential OGDPs. So that was the commissioner comment that I had. Do other commissioners have comments this morning? All right, seeing no further commissioner comments and seeing that we have now undertaken all the business that was placed on our agenda, I believe we are looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Good work, everybody. Good to see everybody. We are now adjourned.